Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us in the next installment of our series on building the autonomous enterprise. I'm Gabe Correjo, and today I'm really excited to have another special guest from the banking and finance world. Today we're going to dive into both macro trends and challenges specifically in the industry, as well as explore specific use cases for our banking customers and folks in the banking industry that will give you the head start and jumpstart your agentic process automation journey. To help me do that, I am joined by our very own Ken Mertzel, the global industry leader for financial services here at Automation Anywhere. Ken, how are you?
Doing well.
It's great to have you. Thank you for making some time. I know you're a busy man right now. What have you been up to lately?
I've been pretty busy, actually, working with a lot of folks talking about AI, surprisingly, as well as working on our upcoming event.
Wonderful. I didn't realize that I got the memo that we've got matching shirts. I think I'm going to make this a rule going forward for the autonomous building the autonomous enterprise series, where we have to wear matching shirts, or at least close to it. So thank you for playing along with that. Speaking of our upcoming event, Jorge, cue the shameless plug music. Oh wait, we don't have that yet. However, shameless plug time. Ken, you are doing a industry super session at, well, I can say that, super session at Imagine Orlando, yeah?
I am. Yeah, I'm excited about it. We've been doing a session on financial services for several years that I've moderated, but this year we've really expanded it. Not only are we going to have a panel with a lot of our customers, because frankly, while everyone likes hearing from us, they really like hearing from fellow customers. And so we'll do a panel on that. But what's new this year is we're also going to have industry-specific booths. So we'll be able to demonstrate some of the latest automation that's going on in banking, and including a lot of agentic process automation.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's always amazing. Imagine is truly a one-of-a-kind event. And to your point, with the agentic process automation solutions, as you mentioned, everyone's talking about it. The truth is, maybe there's not as much being done with it, other than, of course, our customers who are crushing it. And there's a couple prime examples that I want to dive into with you where they are crushing it. But before we get to that, I just want to remind everybody, registration is open for Imagine Orlando 2025 at the Conrad Hotel. We've taken over the entire resort. It's a stunning property. Jorge will put in the link for the registration and the landing page. It's imagine.automationanywhere.com. And I really hope to see you there. As Ken mentioned, whether it's the vertical super sessions specifically for you and your industry, or more broadly the technical breakouts or customer breakouts, tons and tons of insights to be had in an intimate setting, an open setting. And like I said, it's a one-of-a-kind event. So I can't wait to see you there. Ken, when you talk about, how busy you've been and talking about agentic AI, let's just rewind for just a quick second. Let's just talk about, since you've been here, and what the evolution has been from traditional RPA or automation, and now into the agentic world. What does that look like? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think the evolution's in a couple different ways. Way back when, several years ago, first of all the use cases are really focused around back office automation, not really anything customer facing, and really more sort of task based. Take something that's manual, repetitive, and automate that with RPA. So the use cases have changed because now they're a lot more towards, certainly back office use cases, but a lot more towards front office, improving customer experience, driving more revenue growth. Certainly AI has been a big piece of that recently. So we've definitely seen the transition from RPA to agentic process automation, or we call it APA. But what's interesting to me is it's not either or, right? I think people think, oh, well, do I do RPA or do I AI? I think the power that we've seen with our customers is the fact that it's really both, right? I mean, AI is obviously great for helping make decisions, summarizing vast amounts of information, but at the end of the day, you need to actually take some kind of action. And that's where process automation plays in, because at the end of the day, once you made a decision, you need to integrate with all those systems and actually perform activities. So it's really the power of both that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's a great point. We talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago with Micah and team, which also shameless plug. Our APA training camp is happening with the community team right now. So if you haven't already signed up, do sign up for that. Tons and tons of great practices, and we'll help you take some of the things we're going to talk about today and implement them. But this idea of building on a solid foundation, I think, is key, right? This isn't a rip it out and start over again type of scenario. This is building on success. This is building on deterministic workflows, adding in the cognitive elements for sort of exponential gains, right? And it's I've mentioned this before. Again, it's really exciting to see what's possible when you move from sort of these task-based automations you're talking about in the case of banking and finance or back office or what have you, but being able to just address more functions within the business, but also more use cases that are now not task-based but process-based and end-to-end process, touching multiple teams within the company. I think it's funny, as I started doing this a few years ago, you start to really think about a standard process that you and I would take for granted. But if you start to document it and unpack it and figure out the flow, you realize it's touching multiple people. It's not just your team or, your function. So the capabilities, it just becomes an exponential gain. It's exciting to see. When we think about this, though, it's not without its challenges in terms of it being, deploying generative AI, agentic AI. As you mentioned, having the bedrock and foundation of RPA, I think, helps many of our customers. But talk to me a little bit about some of the common things you're hearing. You're out here touring the North America with the biggest banks. You're a thought leader in the space, and I'm sure you're getting pinged not just by customers, but by prospects and others who are like, hey, what do we do here? What do you think? What are some of the questions that come up, and what are people, concerned about?
Yeah, it's interesting because, not surprisingly, there's a lot of excitement, right? And I've actually, a lot of the banks I talk to have some really exciting, interesting use cases. So the biggest challenge I typically hear is, hey, I have these great ideas. I know what I want to do. I just can't get it approved internally. And for good reason, right? Especially when more of the generative AI in particular came out, a year or two ago. Banks and most companies understandably came out with a lot of restrictions on the use, right? And so a lot of the concerns are still there around governance and control. So is my data secure? Is the data and the answers I'm going to get accurate? And so that's the biggest challenge I see is people saying, hey, I'm not sure how I can move forward from an internal standpoint. And obviously, nowadays there are a lot of like AI governance councils and have to approve every single internal use case. So I think it'll evolve over time, and certainly we'll see a lot more. But that's probably the biggest challenge I'm seeing is just the ability to get internal approval to move forward.
Yeah, it's complex, right? And especially in a highly regulated industry, it makes perfect sense. Data is the currency, and data is what your customers are giving you, and and trusting you with. As we think about compliance, you mentioned compliance. What are some of the let's dive in a little bit into some of these use cases. What are some compliance related? Is that where you're seeing the actual use cases? I know we're talking about sort of launching, but from a use case perspective, are there applications for APA in the compliance realm?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you talked about like sort of new use cases that are opening up as a result of AI. What's really interesting, actually, I'm seeing more interest in long-standing existing use cases, but just the ability to do a lot more than they could do before, right? And compliance is a perfect example where historically, you could source data, you could do a lot of basic tasks, but there wasn't a lot of ability to do much around actual decision making, right? Like, how do I actually decide if there is inherent risk? Am I complying or not? And so I think a lot more of the use cases today, as opposed to brand new ones people had never thought of, were extensions of use cases out there before. And that's why compliance is an interesting area, because frankly, most of the regulations, I mean, obviously regulations evolve over time, but most of them aren't that new. Anti-money laundering, KYC, you name it, they've been around for a long time, but all of a sudden they're very hot topics in the automation space. And again, I think it's because the technology has evolved.
That's interesting. It seems like other than the U.S. political climate, AML is in the news a lot, or at least the fines assessed to banks, which are crazy big. It's a complex world out there, obviously. And AML seems to be something that, I mean, if I'm running a business, I don't want a $3 billion fine. I don't know about you, but talk to me a little bit more about AML specifically. Like, what are people doing with APA and the Agentic Process Automation system?
Yeah, and it's interesting when you see the fines too, because obviously the regulations have been around a long time. Banks are investing, hundreds of millions in compliance. But as you say, it's a complex process, and so I think I see where the process and the automation is advancing. Is that historically, if you look at the use cases in AML, they were mostly around data sourcing, right? So go out to access all the transaction information that you have about a customer, about a business, bring all that in and save the investigator, a lot of time, right? Thousands of hours and just aggregating all the information. But the use cases now have dramatically evolved. So rather than just sourcing a bunch of data, now the investigator has to spend hours reading through and then trying to figure out where the true risk is. The difference now is you can use generative AI. And so organizations are taking all that data and then basically creating a Gen AI narrative summary that basically will say, here's all the information you got, but here are the 5 key risks that you need to be focused on. By the way, here's the sources for the information so you can still go look at them. And in addition, be able to provide a risk score to say, hey, this looks like this is highly indicative of a risk or not. And so that's where we're seeing the evolution. That being said, the AI is not making the decision, right? It's a decision support, I would say. And so ultimately, you still need to leverage the investigator, but as opposed to using their time doing data sourcing, gathering information, reading through, now you're really leveraging their expertise, which is, hey, really diving into those areas where it seems risky, looking at those particular transactions, and then making a more informed decision.
Yeah, there's sort of like the clerk level, like research and getting files and whatnot, which, probably RPA starts to do some of that. But then there's like the at least the initial processing of that to at least give me, like you said, here's the 5 key takeaways. I'm sort of generalizing a little bit. Obviously, those aren't technical terms, but there's this this idea of, for me in particular, as those who have joined us in the past know well, I'm a big fan of the TLDR version, but with so much data, I can't imagine how much time and money is spent just simply on aggregating the data and then processing the data to a sense where you have intelligence on what the data even means, right?
Yeah, and the key too is the fact that it's actually a very low percentage. Even when there's a risk alert come through a bank, it's probably about 1% of the time where there's actual risk. And so the key is being able to filter through the other 99% quickly to then spend your time on that 1%. And so that's where a combination of machine learning along with generative AI is helping. But again, these tools are providing the investigator's ability to now really hone in on that risk and make decisions, and then leveraging again process automation on the back end to quickly take action when you need to, whether that's freezing an account, stopping a transaction, etc.
Yeah, I think it's and so I've seen some internal demos. When we go to Imagine, and again, I invite everybody here to join us at Imagine. Around AML in particular, do you have any activities planned?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a really cool demo. At least I think it's cool, but showing exactly how APA can enhance the AML process. So it's very realistic in the sense of taking you right from alert up front, taking you through all the different steps and the analyses in terms of looking at transactions, looking at related accounts, looking at source of funds. But then again, the exciting part for me is then seeing that narrative summary and then being able to help make a decision and then take action. So it really shows that end-to-end flow, because I think people in general get what automation can do, but sort of seeing a real life example, I think really helps. So those will be in our new industry demo booths.
And you can get hands-on, and we're getting a flurry of questions and comments here. I think that number one, if for any reason you can't make it to Imagine, which again I encourage you to do so. Man, I'm killing the shameless plugs today. I'm just on fire. Must be the coffee. But short of that, I just want to remind the audience too. Feel free to reach out, connect with Ken if you're in the industry and have specific questions. Whether it's Ken, we can direct you to our solution engineers and experts. In any case, there's a ton of resources here in this exciting and brave new world. We've got a couple interesting. Before we move on to the next use case that we were gonna dive into, again, we've got a couple interesting comments. One of which I like is which APA use cases seemed promising at first, but turned out to be a bad candidate. And I think it's not so much. I mean, it'll be interesting to think about. Like, this kind of goes into like, where were people sort of scraping their elbows and whatnot? What have you seen? Kind of that question we talked about before. What pitfalls can we help them avoid? Maybe there's a specific use case, and maybe it's more of a mindset and how you approach this.
Yeah, I think it is a broader question. I don't think there is necessarily a bad use case per se, but the typical pitfalls are people get excited and they try to take an unbelievably complex process and immediately automate the thing entirely, end to end, and focus on a very specific tool, like I'm just going to use Gen AI, right? And so, the pitfalls are don't, especially if it's your first automation using generative AI and other tools, pick a simple use case, right? Just to get familiar with it, see how it works. Because often it's not so much the tool that doesn't work, it's just you pick such a complex use case, people aren't used to how to leverage the tools. So I'd say that's key, is really, starting with something simple. We're actually seeing a lot of organizations start out with, for example, an internal use case, because you don't want to start out with something incredibly high risk, right? So something that's, highly watched, highly regulated, customer facing day one. So do something really simple. How about feed in your internal policies or procedures and have a knowledge base where someone can quickly go in, query and ask questions, right? Not sophisticated, but actually it's leveraging a lot of the generative AI tools. And then over time, add more, more maybe complex ones, more customer facing ones that have more, regulatory implications, et cetera. So I think that's usually what drives some of the failures. It's more of just taken on too much early.
Yeah. And again, I think that paradigm, solid business practices are always solid business practices, no matter what sort of day and age you live in, right? We talked a little bit about this again with Micah and the community team, and a shameless plug. Wow, I'm on fire right now. The APA training camp, I think, addresses a lot of this, gives you a lot of best practices, give you frameworks for how to assess and prioritize use cases and ferret out quote unquote bad candidates. And I think, to your point as well, a bad candidate is a relative term in the sense of where you are in your journey, right? Like trying to take on some ultra complex, high risk process, maybe not where you want to start, right?
Yeah, it's not to say you can't do it. It's just, like just start with something simpler once you're adept at it. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it'll take on very complex and customer facing use case. You just have to, get more comfortable with the technology.
I want to, so since we're talking about use cases, I want to talk about another use case. You and I were talking recently. I thought we were talking about fried chicken, but then you said, no, it's KYC, not KFC. So my bad. But I recently had to open a bank account for a little thing, and I was actually shocked at how much paperwork I had to fill out, and how much redundant paperwork I had to fill out, and how much copying and collating. And I mean, there was like 7 sets of the same documents, and the documents were 50 pages, or the sets were like 50 pages each. And I was there for like 3 hours. I thought it was gonna be 10 minutes. And I'm just a normal little guy, just starting a little personal business with my wife, like just no big deal. Like I can't imagine at the you sort of enterprise level, as we're talking about some of these things. I think some of that was the customer onboarding and KYC regulations and whatnot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, when you talk to banks and you ask about their pain points, usually like customer onboarding, that term comes up a lot. And usually what's driving a lot of that is behind the scenes. It's the know your customer KYC compliance. And as you mentioned as well, well, two things. So one is I think folks are certainly when you talk to banks, they're focused on, geez, very inefficient process, takes a lot of manual effort. But to your point, there's even a much bigger issue, right? Which is the customer impact. Because especially, for most customers, frankly, they're going through KYC, it's their first interaction with that bank, right? And so you don't really want your first interaction to be, man, that was really painful setting up an account and I had to send 1,000 documents, right? Because that's literally your first thought. And so the more organizations can do to not only streamline the back end, but streamline the front end, that's really critical. And so that's exactly what we're seeing now. And what's interesting is it's in two ways. So it's not only, as I described before, there are similarities certainly to AML in terms of being able to, source a lot of information. Um, but I think what's slowing down the process is two things. One, it's a lot of information, right? Especially, and that's where I think again the technology can really benefit now, more commercial or corporate banking, right? Because as you experience, it's much more complex than I Ken Mertz want to open an account, right? For a business, they need articles of incorporation. I mean, all kinds of information, right? And so, what typically slows down the process is not only getting all the documents, but it's handoffs, because they're also going to external sources of information, right? They're looking at sanctions lists, they're looking at politically exposed persons lists, they're looking at adverse. I mean, there's all kinds of things, and so each one of those historically has been done sequentially, and so it just makes it a long, painful process. And so what we're seeing with agentic process automation is that actually it's able to take all that and basically, rather than an individual doing that and then handing off to the next step, the agent can basically manage that in sort of a seamless process end to end. There'll still be some interaction with the customer, but it's sort of taking a lot of those handoffs that are just adding, days to the process. And then on the back end, the critical piece is the same as I described before. Is at the end of the day, they're just looking to make sure you are who you say you are, and also from an AML standpoint, right? You're not doing criminal, fraudulent activity, and so that's where that narrative summary to say this is all the information we gathered, looks good, or hey, here's the risky items that you need to look at. And so that's where it's really beneficial. The key, though, again, in all these processes, and also it goes back to our other conversation about governance, is that the ultimate control is human in the loop, right? And so for any of these decisions, particularly you're going to have significant regulatory impact or particular, significant customer impact, at the end of the day, that's where you want the analyst or investigator to be looking at this and making a decision. It's not going to be AI deciding, no, I'm not going to let Gabe open an account. So.
Yeah, and I think that that's important, right? Like I have a very simple, not as serious as like protecting against AML or other things. But the idea of automation copilot being integrated and notifying me when there's something to review, and me just being able to go to one spot and interact with both the the data output or whatever it's presenting, being able to interact in natural language now, where I'm just chatting with, this assistant that I magically have, which is amazing. I'm talking about in the sense of content generation, but nonetheless, the premise remains, the simplicity of, I think the UX and the UI part of it is vastly underrated, just being able to go to one spot. And as you mentioned, that was my first experience. We had moved to Newtown. We decided to start a small business. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what Ken and I talk about. But, in this world, in today's age, in any industry, it's extremely competitive, right? I know that there's upstart banking, there's the sort of non-physical banks that have popped up, but in any sort of retail endeavor in particular, the competition is fierce. And to your point, that customer experience is a competitive advantage, right? Which I want to bring another question up. Ashish Batla, thank you for posting this question. And for the others with the questions, I'll try to get to them, I promise. He says, KYC for banks is still very manual for both makers and checkers. Between the maker and checker, which one is comparatively easier to automate and will give better ROI?
Interesting. So
I'm going to say it depends.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So, like in terms of the maker, and I'll kind of say it in terms of someone who's like, sourcing all the data and then ultimately someone who's auditing or reviewing, right? So you could argue from an ROI, hey, there's so much work going on involved in that first step in terms of the maker that clearly high ROI, right? But it kind of depends how you define ROI, because especially in the compliance space, yeah, you could define ROI as operational efficiency, productivity, right? I spend less time sourcing documents, but in the compliance space, the much bigger ROI, if you will, is reducing risk, which has nothing to do with how many hours you spend. It's at the end of the day, did you avoid a potential transaction that could be fraudulent or indicative of criminal activity? And so that's where, from the checker standpoint, right, that ability to further mitigate risk is, I'd argue, in the compliance space, almost more. I mean, you always want efficiency, but in the compliance space, that risk mitigation aspect is much more important, frankly, than the efficiency piece. And that's where you're seeing those fines, right? It doesn't take much to all of a sudden, have regulatory issues.
Yeah, of course. That brings me to another question that was posted as well. This is, are there new metrics? I think it's a little bit more narrow than what we're talking about, but I think you bring up a good point. Are there new metrics that surfaced with the agentic paradigm worth getting to know, such as with AI evaluations? I think again, it depends on in what context. Are we talking in the context of financial services in particular, financial services and banking, or but in the context of more generally AI and agentic? And for the second part, if we're talking AI and agentic, again, shameless plug, bada bing. If you go to pathfinder.automationanywhere.com, which Jorge will send you the link, there is the Pathfinder framework. And in there are specific tracks around analytics and analysis and metrics that I think are phenomenal. So I recommend giving those a look. But in the context of banking, Ken, you just mentioned, I think, a big one. Obviously, like, it's not about sort of straight through processing necessarily. Those can be KPIs, but what other metrics, when you talk to clients, what do they think about solving? And then are there other, frameworks for how to measure success or impact?
I think the metrics have evolved over time, because obviously if you're talking pure process automation, you are going to be talking productivity metrics, right? How much time did I save? How much cost did I lower? And so we are seeing the metrics evolve. Again, that's still an important, banks will still focus on operational efficiency, particularly in this kind of, shaky economic environment. But now we're seeing metrics, focus more in certainly in compliance, obviously, a lot of risk metrics. The challenge there is there's no one obvious metric that you'll immediately know if you've mitigated risk. Like you don't look at fines, right? Because by the time you get a fine, that's something you probably done a year or two ago, and it's much too late. Meanwhile, you're still incurring a lot of risk. So you're trying to look for sort of adjacent metrics that will give you a quicker indicator, right? So to the extent you can see, for example, what percentage of like alerts come through that you actually take action on, right? And the ability to reduce those sort of false alerts, and then the ability to like, how quickly do you take action on the ones that are indicative? I mean, that's just one example. Or another one is, for example, and there's no perfect metric, right? But looking at audit issues, right? So internal audit, internal compliance, they're all trying to help the business ensure they're mitigating risk, right? So over time, to the extent you see fewer of those issues come up, again, it's just an indicator. It's not a perfect indicator that you're probably on the right track. So long-term down the road, you're going to get less fines, et cetera. And then the other category of metrics we're seeing more, again, is more on that customer experience, which again, you can do via, sometimes you see immediate surveys after you've done a transaction. Sometimes obviously organizations look at NPS scores, et cetera. So we're seeing more metrics just beyond, pure efficiency.
Yeah, so those dashboards have evolved a little bit, and in bringing in sort of that end user experience or some of these other things. I remember, believe it or not, years ago, I was at a Silicon Valley company, and actually in the compliance team. And I remember, as you mentioned, like if there was an issue from an audit or something else, like one of the things you have to do is immediately show that you're addressing it. Like it doesn't have to be solved right away because it's complex or whatever, right? But to your point, the speed to even get to say that, hey, we're addressing it now, that's probably a metric that needs to be happening, right? It's also, as you mentioned, very complex. These regulations are changing. The ground is, it seems like the ground is constantly shifting. Whether it's in North America, whether it's, intercontinental or, country to country, so many things in the context of AML in particular, where you're, having to deal with multiple systems, multiple countries' laws and regulations and all these kinds of things. Talk to me a little bit about just like how banking and how banks are using APA and just in the regulatory environment, which seems to be ever evolving.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area because I remember, when I was in the industry, it was a big challenge, as you said, just keeping on top of all the regulations, right? And it's very difficult for the central compliance organization to track every single regulatory change, and then get it communicated out to the business who actually acts to implement process changes associated with that. So that's where AI and agentic process automation we're seeing some interesting strides. So for example, what you can do is actually go out to government websites, and organizations are doing this now. So go out, monitor all the regulations, right? Have AI do that. It can easily track what's changed, right? And you can do this on an ongoing basis. So it'll track the change. Then it can create an alert to compliance to say, hey, this is what's changing. And then also subsequently create communications to the relevant business units to do that. So that's one really exciting thing, is just trying to stay on top of all the changes and get them communicated. But the even more exciting one is to be able to actually apply the regulations. So what we're seeing is you can create a knowledge base, if you will, of all those regulations, let's say particular to a certain regulation, what have you. And then you can run your transactions against those regulations in real time. And actually identify areas where, I need to take a different action because this will be counter the regulations. So I can give you two quick examples. One is we've seen early on, and you're aware of this one as well, in the tax space, right? So you can take complex tax regulations, which you can imagine vary dramatically from country to country, and you can basically take a database of those regulations. Then you can run through, and this isn't just like corporate income tax. This could be a sales tax, what have you. And be able to take, like, for example, invoices you're sending to a customer, run it against this database of tax regulations. And rather than someone manually looking through every single one, basically it can flag to say, hey, these are the ones that seem counter to that regulation. You should take a look at this. Again, human loop, they'll look at it, say, yep, we need to make a change, right? And we've seen, customers save, over like $120 million in one case annually, just doing that. But another more direct banking example would be, think about all the regulations associated with fees, right? Overdraft fees. I mean, you name it, right? Any fee. There are very specific regulations for a lot of those. So think about the ability to take those regulations. Now, when you're about to charge a fee or you're thinking about a new fee structure, be able to run it against those regulations and identify where there's issues. So that there's, a myriad of implications in any regulation. So that ability not only to track changes, but the ability also, in real time to take action and compare what you're doing versus the regulations and flag where there's an issue is a great tool.
That's really interesting. You flagged something for me. As a consumer, of course, I hate fees, but nonetheless, if I was a business owner and I was looking to monetize or figure out new sources of revenue or what's possible, when I think about a GTM motion for, a product or something else, you've got this ability. So this is where some of those metrics you talked about, and some of it's not even about the metrics, maybe. I mean, metrics always matter, but strategically, sort of zooming out, you can look at not just straight through processing and efficiency. You can look at growth metrics. You can look at, there's so many new opportunities, right? I think
I get excited about think about things like cross-selling, right, or upselling, right, and just based on what you know about the customer, saying, hey, they're about to close on a mortgage, they're getting a new house, maybe they have needs for some additional services related to their home, or similarly, like retention, like, hey, the nature of questions we're getting as an insurance company seems like someone's shopping around and may want to leave, and so, hey, here's some things they need to proactively talk to them, either directly or via the agent, to retain them. So there are a lot of new things you can do that you might not have been able to do before. And on top of that, to your point about the experience, the customer experience, even if it's not an individual talking to them, I think you're going to see a dramatic transformation in terms of interaction, particularly in terms of chat. Because I don't know about your experience. My experience when I go to many banks is, and there'll even be a sort of, virtual agent, if you will, and I'll type in, and then either it'll come back a response that's completely unrelated to what I was asking, or, it doesn't understand, because it really, behind the scenes, it'll only understand three things. I want a statement, I want a transfer, right? And so in the future, what's interesting, and I'm seeing this with other companies, where you'll be chatting with an agent, very normal interaction, you don't even realize it's not actually a human, right?
Yeah.
But the key is, behind the scenes, there's sophisticated technology, and when you need a human involved, it'll engage them. So we're going to see a lot, different customer experience with those types.
We talked about this in a couple of different contexts. In my world in marketing, the idea of personalization has been bantied about as far as it being possible for a while now. The reality is, it's not. To your point, it's based on deterministic flows for the most part, where you've pre-scheduled and predetermined, like based on hypothesis, based on persona research, et cetera, with like these chatbots, right? Like they probably want to go down this path. And there's I don't know if anybody's a Seinfeld fan here, but there's a famous episode where Kramer, this is a dating, it dates me, but
this is not a plug though, so.
Yeah, there's not a plug. There was an episode where there used to be a thing where you could dial on your phone. This is pre-internet, obviously. You dial the 1-800-FILM to find out movie times in your location. So you dial the number, you enter your zip code, and then you can select. You can find out movie times if you don't have the newspaper. Kramer gets the number. People are calling him, and he's looking up in the newspaper for them, pretending to basically be the chat agent, right? But then he starts to get it wrong, and at some point he just says, "Why don't you just tell me what you want to see?" And I feel like that with all of these chatbots right now. Some are getting better. There's the guest reservation concierge AI personas that are really interesting. But nonetheless, the point is, this idea of personalization is coming, and I think that will enhance the experience overall. I know it will, right? Who doesn't want? I don't want you trying to sell me something I'm not interested in, but you're checking off some box in some matrix that says maybe I'm likely have a propensity to do X. No, just know me, right? And now with Agentic AI, and specifically with Agentic Process Automation, because not only can you do the processing, but you can deliver the data to the right places, right? You can move the things, you can pull the things, process them, and then take action. And the action piece, I think, is the big piece. But I think that's it's a big deal. But I want to. There's actually a question in the chat that I want to get back to, because as we wrap up, I want to talk, just revisit some of those best practices and recommendations. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Greg Kelly, who joined the feed. Thanks for joining, Greg. There is, let's see, where's the question? There it is. There's a level of ambiguity around agentic. Thanks to all of our competitors. No, it's not just our competitors. Clearly, there's only one agentic process leader. That's not a shameless plug. That's just a fact. No, and you're right, LinkedIn user. Everyone, when generative AI came out, all of a sudden everyone had generative AI in their product. Whether it's generative AI washing, now it's agentic washing. Not all agents are created equal. Agentic process automation is different than sort of a simple agent that's a chatbot, as you mentioned, Ken. But more generally, or because of this ambiguity in the market, whether you call it generative AI or agentic, what are ways it says, what are ways to overcome leadership skepticism? So I'm sure that we've got stakeholders, I'm sure that we've got prospects that are like, we really want to do this. We see the promise of this. How do we convince stakeholders and leadership that this is the way to go? What would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of good techniques. So one is always a good idea to understand like what's on the strategic, agenda, if you will, of a senior exec, right? Whether that's, cost reduction, revenue growth, cash flow, whatever that is, like you're going to get a lot more receptivity if you're able to address whatever those big challenges that they're trying to overcome. So that's number one. Second, what's effective is create automation, if you will. It's not in production, but it's actually a demo, right? But it's a real customized demo so that you can see exactly how the technology would work, in your own systems, make it more real, right? Because just talking in theory about you could do this, there's still the skepticism. And if it would work, I don't know if it would work in our unique processes, et cetera. So I've seen that pretty effective. And then the third piece is what I talked about before, which is really start with something simple. Because if you can get someone to buy in going, wow, you did that, it only took you how long, it's able to, save this much time or reduce risk by this amount. Then they're like, wow, that's exciting. I want to move forward. I think it's interesting around, AI and APA because, right now a lot of people are like, hey, I have a lot of ideas, but, it's tough to get started, tough to get approvals. But I feel like, 6 months from now, a lot of banks and other organizations are going to, show what they're able to do. And all of a sudden, all the other executives go, why don't we have this? I want to do this tomorrow. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that all of a sudden all the restrictions are going to be dropped, nor should it. But it's going to put a lot of pressure. So that's why you really want to be doing, more of the sort of test and learn now, test in a safe environment, not like test for the regulatory process or what have you, but do that now so that you're really ready when everyone gets more comfortable with that to move forward quickly.
When the gates open up on the but to your point, I mean, we have customers right now, and we've had customers now for the last couple of years. I mean, KeyBank was on stage, PNC was on stage. There's many that were on stage with us, I'd imagine, over the last 2 years, achieving some remarkable results. But I think too, I love this idea that you mentioned because I was just talking to one of our product managers, Pratush, and this idea of being able to show sort of the real world. It's not just a real world demo, but it's actually using your data. So it's in your environment, basically, in a safe spot, right? Like it's not sort of in full production or anything. Call it a POC, call it what you want. I don't even think it has to be a POC, really. It's like, hey, I can do it. This thing, I can build this in a day. I can use our, in a safe environment again, can use this dummy data or safe data from our internally. This is how it would work. And then you very quickly get like this tangible. I think there's something that about it being within your environment, especially in a conservative environment, highly regulated environment that makes it real. So I think that's a great recommendation. And of course, let's see, I think that user, it was an anonymous user. So hopefully that answers it for you. But again, feel free to reach out. We can schedule you. There's live demos that we can schedule. There's many ways to engage to see this in your environment and see the power of agentic process automation. I encourage you to do so. Ken, time has flown again. I think we were only supposed to I was only supposed to keep you for a half hour. So hopefully you are, canceling your meetings as we were talking, and you're probably saying, well, Gabe's got me, he's dragging me out again. But this has been very insightful. I love the deep dive into the use cases, and there's even more to be had. I'll remind the users one more time. Feel free to reach out to Ken. Feel free to reach out to me so we can connect you with the folks that, or more in particular, me, connect you with the people that have the answers, because it's not me.
And if I could just mention one more piece of advice, the key is really like engaging all those governance partners, right? Risk, compliance, audit, legal, like engage them early and often, because the more you do that, they're brought into the process from the start, and the much more successful you're going to be when you go to actually put something into production. So that's a lesson I learned early in my career. Again, at the end of the day, they're really they seem like a barrier, but they're actually trying to help you do the right things. So bring them in really early, and then not as shameless of a plug as you would do, but we are seeing, that customers that have our platform, like I just say, leverage the AI and the governance that's built into the platform, right? It's there to help you, and then it'll help you be able to navigate your organization in terms of, hey, should I be able to do this? And so we have seen, organizations that have our platform, because you're obviously already comfortable that it's secure. You wouldn't use the platform even for RPAs. So you have that level of security, but now there's a whole different level in terms of AI governance. So, leverage what's in the platform to help you and to be able to convince others, look, I got the right level of rigor to go ahead and do some of this, generative AI and AI work as well. So
it's fantastic. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad you came out from the darkness there and let us know who you are. We appreciate you joining. Appreciate all of you joining. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ken. I look forward to seeing everybody at Imagine Orlando. Last plug of the day, I promise. And Ken, I look forward to doing this again. I want to talk more use cases. I want to hear more about banking, and I want to hear how, when I start my next business, it's not going to take me 4 hours to fill out the paperwork.
Sounds good. Great talking to you.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon. Join us soon for our next installment of Building the Autonomous Enterprise. And until then, have a great week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.